Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking what is honestly a truly foundational case study in modern business. We're looking at how a single, seemingly isolated customer incident literally brought a massive global airline to its knees. Look, if you want to understand crisis management, brand strategy, or the very real cost of a customer experience failure, you are in the exact right place. We're going to visualize how the fragile architecture of corporate trust can completely collapse, and more importantly, why it happens in the first place.
Okay, let's dive into this. We are looking back at April 2017, when a paying customer was forcibly and violently removed from an overbooked flight. But we aren't just looking at the physical event itself. We're breaking down the mechanics of the massive cinematic fallout that happened right after. A 30-second cell phone video did what decades of competition couldn't. Think about that. This wasn't a rival airline undercutting their prices or launching a better loyalty program. No, this was a completely self-inflicted wound caught on camera. It entirely bypassed traditional market competition and struck a direct, devastating blow right to the very heart of the brand. I really want to emphasize the sheer asymmetry of those stakes. Just 30 seconds, half a minute of amateur smartphone footage completely shattered years of meticulous brand building, hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing, and decades of corporate trust. In fact, that brief little clip temporarily wiped out close to $1 billion in market value. $1 billion. In our modern digital era, a localized operational hiccup can escalate into a massive strategic heart attack in less time than it takes to buckle your seatbelt. So how exactly does a corporation lose $1 billion over a single seat?
That brings us to Section 1, the architecture of trust, the fragility of the implied contract.
So why are airlines so uniquely vulnerable to this specific kind of reputation damage? Well, it all comes down to a system of trust. Think about what happens when you board an airplane. You are surrendering almost all of your personal control, right? You can't open a window, you can't just get off when you feel like it, and you are literally trusting this company with your physical safety. That massive surrender of control creates a really deep implied contract with you, the consumer. And that contract forms the absolute core of the airline's brand identity. When an airline breaks this system of trust, it isn't just a bad flight, it's a profound violation of a core contract. It's actually incredibly similar to the underlying issues we saw during the Chipotle food safety crisis. If your fundamental promise of safety or basic human respect is broken, the entire foundation of the business just begins to crumble.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens to a brand's cultural fit when that underlying trust is broken. You can actually draw direct parallels to the commercial struggles of massive retail brands like Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie & Fitch. Now, those brands slowly lost their alignment with modern consumer expectations over a period of several years, and they suffered massively for it. But United found itself on this exact same list of cultural fit failures overnight. The reason was that the visual evidence in that video so starkly contradicted what we all expect from a modern brand. Instead of hospitality and service, the world suddenly saw a cold, hostile bureaucracy.
Which leads us to Section 2, the digital firestorm, when local failures go global.
Let's look at the digital infrastructure of public opinion. In the past, a terrible customer service experience stayed highly localized. A few people complained, maybe it made a regional newspaper, and the company quietly settled it. Today, the escalation is terrifyingly fast. Just look at this timeline. Step 1. An incident happens in an isolated cabin in Chicago in the morning. Step 2, because every single customer is now a global broadcaster equipped with a smartphone, that footage hits the internet. Before the day is out, you have a massive stock price collapse on Wall Street in New York. Step 3, by the very next morning, it triggers a PR nightmare in Shanghai, where a huge portion of the airline's emerging customer base is watching this footage in absolute horror. An operational hiccup scaled into a global financial disaster across 3 different time zones in under 24 hours. Now, we need to make a very clear distinction here about the type of crisis this was. On the left, consider the infamous Pepsi marketing misfire from a few years ago. That was a failure of messaging. It was superficial. They made a completely tone-deaf advertisement, people on social media got mad, the company pulled the ad, and we all quickly moved on. But on the right, look at United Airlines. This was a profound failure of actual customer experience. It wasn't just some bad script written by an ad agency. It was a deeply ingrained operational crisis that revealed a massive rot in how actual paying customers were being treated in the real world.
You see, the technology that connects us is entirely neutral. It just amplifies whatever you feed it. We saw this exact dynamic with Zoom, where digital systems scaled user connection and hypergrowth to unprecedented levels practically overnight. But that exact same digital amplification applies to reputation crises. When you feed that global system a deeply visceral failure of customer experience, it scales the damage globally in a matter of hours. The network doesn't care if it's scaling your success or scaling your destruction.
Let's get into the corporate autopsy in Section 3. The root diagnosis, culture misalignment, and policy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the vicious clash between policy and empathy. On the left, you have the manual. The staff on that plane were technically following the strict written rules of overbooking and crew displacement. They were executing rigid corporate policy right to the letter. But on the right, you have the human, the basic values of genuine hospitality, de-escalation, and common sense. In that absolutely critical moment, the employees prioritized strict internal policies over radical transparency and basic empathy. They felt they had no choice. They literally chose the manual over the human. And that exact disconnect is the ultimate catalyst. That is how a local operational failure transforms into a massive global strategic crisis. When your frontline workers feel so paralyzed and bound by rigid procedures that they completely abandon common sense and hospitality, you have a massive culture misalignment on your hands. It echoes the exact same culture misalignment we saw at Wells Fargo a while back, where extreme internal pressures and rigid policies drove employee behaviors that completely destroyed consumer trust.
The sources analyzing this corporate autopsy call this exactly what it is: a leadership development failure. You literally cannot just blame the frontline workers or the security personnel here. When your talent capability completely fails to match the modern market's demand for empathy, leadership has ultimately failed. It's on leadership. They are solely responsible for training employees to confidently navigate those complex, messy gray areas where the corporate manual ends and basic human decency begins. Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, rebuilding a global brand, the painful road to recovery. Fixing this level of structural damage requires massive enterprise change, and the requirements to pull that off are absolutely monumental. You need a complete workforce transformation. You have to literally rewrite the software of human behavior across tens of thousands of employees around the globe. The goal? Putting the customer right back at the center of every single decision. It requires prioritizing convenience, quality, and brand trust above standard operating procedures. This is an incredibly difficult thing to do at scale. It's the kind of massive internal overhaul we've seen executed in successful multi-year transformations from organizations like Accenture, Unilever, and Pret A Manger. It is never just a quick PR campaign. It is about fundamentally changing the DNA of how the company operates every single day. So the crucial point is this: a reputation is built over 1,000 flights, but it can be destroyed in a single aisle. Trust is an airline's ultimate competitive asset. Think about how Wendy's fiercely leverages its social media presence as a competitive asset to build loyalty, or how Chipotle now aggressively treats consumer trust and transparency as a core marketing pillar. For global airlines, the most important thing they carry isn't the luggage in the cargo hold or the jet fuel in the wings. It is the absolute, unquestioned confidence of their passengers. Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to consider today. Has United fully recovered? Or does that 30 seconds of footage still secretly haunt the brand's cultural fit even now? The digital age means that public memories are long and internet archives are entirely permanent. It's a powerful cinematic reminder of the absolute fragility of corporate trust in a hyper-connected world. I really encourage you to reflect on this dynamic and to explore our other brand strategy case studies to see how these exact forces play out across entirely different industries. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning how the brands around you are actively building or quietly breaking